The Xbox 360 was the last great console. Everything released since may have been marketed as a console, but functions more like a lesser PC in need of constant upgrades. PlayStation 4 in 2013, how about a soft upgrade in 2018 via the PS4 Pro? PlayStation 5 in 2020 that you have to buy from a scalper because none are in stock. How about an even more expensive PlayStation 5 Pro in 2025 that no one can afford? Let's try to keep this Xbox though. How about Xbox Games Pass, a once too good to be true subscription service that now charges $30 a month for the privilege of playing mostly mediocre first-party games on day one. Now it is 2025 and two things are apparent. One, the Xbox has turned 20, and two,
Microsoft is dead.
I yearn for the days of the Xbox 360, but maybe not in the way you're expecting someone to yearn for a once great period of joyful consumption. So let's rewind the tape a couple of decades and see if we can unspool anything worth salvaging. I might have turned drinking age in 2007, but 2008 was the year that forced me not exactly into adulthood, but somewhere between the icy margins of profit accumulation and survival. When I did turn drinking age in December of 2007, I felt sorry for myself and therefore in a fit of privileged whining was able to negotiate an Xbox 360 from my parents while home from college for a weekend. The first night back, I headed to the Blockbuster I rarely went to, not because I was busy studying, but because I was busy drinking, and rented The Elder Scrolls Oblivion and Dead Rising. Then I walked to a Quality Dairy convenience store and bought myself a 12-pack of Who Gives a Fuck. When I returned to my dorm alone because my roommate was never there, I played 30 minutes of Oblivion and was so bored to tears I switched to Dead Rising, hoping to feel something. The 72-hour cycle in legendary difficulty was too much for my newly minted 21-year-old brain to handle, so in a fit of frustration and loneliness, I decided to call my rebound girlfriend and sloppily requested a drunken hookup. I was not a good person in 2007, and I was definitely not a good person in 2008, though I felt like a more real autonomous person in 2008 than I did in 2007. 2008 was the first time in my life like I felt like I had truly endured and overcame something. I was always terrified of getting a job, even at a young age. Something in me, now I know to be my super ego, already was preparing me for the banality of a forced coexistence with other people with interests so dissimilar to mine. Working a job I hated didn't make me feel less lonely, but it definitely made me feel like a prisoner trapped with other people who acted like their job gave them purpose, but I knew deep down none of them wanted to be there. And so I played Mass Effect and Elder Scrolls and Bioshock, what I call the unholy trinity of mainstream power fantasies that were very popular in the latter half of the 2000s. I played them so I could find common ground with other coworkers. These usually amounted to little more than 5-minute conversations with future MAGA supporters that were often no more than a regurgitation of whatever IGN review we skimmed as we scrolled down to see the review score number. Looking back now in 2025, I regret having my time energy zapped from me, even though I was living a normal life, at least as normal a life as I could be living in 2008. Instead of scouring forums and making connections with other obscure tastemakers, I was drinking in bars with coworkers and friends. I went to the Bioshock Infinite midnight release in 2013, only to drive back to the bar and drain a few beers as my copy of Bioshock Infinite sat in its packaging in the passenger seat of my car. When I did eventually choose to binge it on Easter weekend 2013, I needed Adderall to get me through the experience. I wasn't that immersed, but influencers, even the radical ones, told me that I should be immersed, so I played along because I didn't have time to think for myself. All that time working, all that time spent in bars throwing away money with coworkers and friends was time not spent discovering the catalog of Cavia. No Bullet Witch for me, games that no one in the West talked about because Bayonetta was about to become a reality. Bayonetta was conventionally hot, confident, and used her fists instead of a massive gun. The Bullet Witch was quiet, unsure, timid. The world Bayonetta was saving was a glossy metropolis of sexy angels and demons, whereas Bullet Witches was a suburban sprawl of empty space and unfinished game design. But what was there, meaning what I've seen through captured Let's Play footage, was a game bursting with weirdo potential. Ninja Blade was another 6 disregarded in the West, an impressive amalgamation of third-person action combat and Dark Soulsian building and prestige with a smattering of hefty quick-time events. This was the last game developed by FromSoft before they changed the course of gaming forever. Demon's Souls released a week after Ninja Blade in Japan. Demon's Souls was a PlayStation 3 exclusive, whereas Ninja Blade was an Xbox 360 exclusive, and it was nominated for GameSpot's Games No One Played in 2009 list. Ninja Gaiden 2, which is technically the second Ninja Gaiden 2, reviewed well and sold well, but didn't enjoy the same cultural moment of its prequel, Xbox's Ninja Gaiden. The fact that two of Xbox 360's best games are both rock-hard, action-difficult combat games starring ninjas signaled an era that was already quaint by their release, and I'm annoyed I didn't get to experience any of it in real time. Back then, I saw a 6 as mid. It took me way too long to realize that a 6 isn't bad, a 6 is interesting, oftentimes more interesting than an 8 or shit, even a 9. You can tell a 6 by its sheer not give a fuckery. There's an attitude to a 6. It doesn't care to rack up a ton of sales. It doesn't even care to earn critical acclaim. A 6 is both a game that didn't sell and was neglected by the people who were supposedly experts on taste. To hold this perspective is itself to actively exist outside the system of accumulation, at least psychologically. My body was still in the process of exerted repetition, my personality being fine-tuned to please and impress people who didn't care if I lived or died. I don't say this to be dramatic. I literally mean that it is pointless to try and impress strangers. What I was playing during those accumulation years indicated I didn't really have my heart in my hobby the way I ought to. I was playing Mass Effect 2 at the frequency of a love-scorned 24-year-old who had gotten his heart broken twice the year prior. I bounced off Portal 2 so severely, not because I was too stupid to solve its puzzles, but because I was so distracted by the one thing I didn't have. A woman who could hold me in her arms and assure me that everything was going to be alright, because everything wasn't alright. The summer of 2008 was spent learning a new trade for what I thought would be a brief moment in time. I was so stressed out acquiring a moderate level of entry-level competence that I texted a high school friend and asked him if I could borrow his PlayStation 3 so I could play Metal Gear Solid 4, Guns of the Patriots. I paid him $20 for the rental, and I paid full retail price for a copy of MGS4. I wouldn't have my own PS3 until a year and a half later, when I secured my loyalty to Sony by mostly kissing my Xbox 360 goodbye. I did on occasion revisit my 360. Alan Wake was the one Xbox exclusive I was anticipating in the spring of 2010. I spent each day of April and May feverishly anticipating Remedy's newest IP. I fantasized about being a failed writer in rural Washington as I scanned grocery items, as I drank in bars with friends and coworkers, as I went on late-night bike rides alone to keep my sanity. I rode past empty four-lease suburban buildings imagining what Alan Wake might be doing in there, surviving the Taken. I imagined my failing suburban town was experiencing thrilling encounters with darkness when everyone else was asleep. I was desperately trying to create meaning or excitement or ecstasy where there really wasn't any. But I could forgo all the Friday nights I never spent at Blockbuster passing up the likes of Bullet Witch or Ninja Blade or Ninja Gaiden 2, but what I can't forgive are all the role-playing treasures I missed out on. Hours and hours of literary perfection crammed into a machine that was tragically too far ahead of its time. It is no accident that the Xbox 360 sold poorly in Japan. It is also no accident that the best Xbox 360 had to offer was made in Japan. Nier, Blue Dragon, Lost Odyssey, Steins Gate, Idolmaster. By the late 2000s, Japan's relevance was beginning to wane in the West. The Final Fantasy brand had monopolized Japanese role-playing games, while BioWare, Bethesda, and Irrational were busy securing critical acclaim and massive sales with their hetero-bro interpretations of what real role-playing was supposed to look like. Who in the hell had time for a dollar store Goku-ass looking 14-year-old in 2007? Who had time for a story about a 1,000-year-old man who had built up several lifetimes over of lived experience? Who had time for a creepy-looking father who has to protect his extremely vulnerable but also insanely intelligent daughter in a post-apocalyptic society of cruelty? But what I missed out on wasn't a nostalgia for lost futures, but rather a nostalgia for alternate paths. I built up a nostalgia for an overworked existence that at least had the right games to keep me company, not 40 hours of oblivion so I could keep up on Borderlands-style memes that are not only no longer relevant, but also embarrassingly cringe. What I'm experiencing now isn't a nostalgia for a past I actually lived. It's a nostalgia for a past I didn't actually have. I'm grieving a version of 2008 where I already am the person I am now. And that's the trap of whatever moment we're still locked in. It always makes us feel like we are behind, having to play catch up. So the projects we might actually want to work on end up getting paused indefinitely so we can continue to fantasize about what might have been had we been better people decades ago. In my case, my biggest regret wasn't having better taste at a younger age. Is this pathetic? Before Mark Fisher unalived himself in 2017, he said that the future had been canceled. What did he mean by that? Capitalism's motor force may have once been production, and in some sense it still is, but the more prevalent motor force since the 21st century has been consumption. But what exactly are we looking forward to? A hype new album? A new video game release? That new pair of shoes? It's not just that we look forward to these commodities, it's that we literally spend our present moments trapped in a fantasy of desire, imagining what it might feel like once we've gained the commodity. But it's not the commodity we're after, not anymore. Now it's so we can participate in the hype cycle along with other people. Like all philosophers, Fisher dabbled in philosophical jargon. He defined reflexive impotence as the inability to do anything except pursue pleasure. But what happens when people start becoming aware of, things are slowly getting worse each day, and yet you still continue to choose the fantasy looking forward to the future instead of doing anything in the present moment. This is where consumer anticipation hijacks the future because the future is virtually being played out in our heads. Is it more likely that we are willingly giving our psychical data away to these algorithms so they might anticipate themselves what we might look forward to next? Spotify playlists are a perfect example of this, and I'm not saying this is entirely a bad thing. Detroit rapper Danny Brown, What Up Doe, dropped one of the most innovative rap albums of all time, at least to me, because his Spotify algorithm started playing a more hyperpop after listening to 100 gecs for 30 minutes a day while in rehab. So if you're always locked in looking forward to the next content event in your life, you're waiting. Not necessarily suffering or acting, just in a slightly suspended state of low frequency distraction. On occasion, you'll find yourself in a high frequency version of this where you're ecstatic, but just remember, the higher the feeling, the harder the come down. The cycle of anticipatory consumer culture gives you infinite micro futures to look forward to, so the sting of whatever future was canceled isn't so painful. So how is this any different from desire, you might be wondering? Anticipation is a temporal loop, a waiting for a future that will never come, and is instead filled in by fantasies of micro-futures to come. The next Danny Brown album, in my case, Reflexive Impotence, is a looped pattern of time where you know nothing will change, so you don't act, so nothing changes, rinse and repeat. In numerology, this is what is called a closed circuit, or zero. Every hype cycle in consumer culture is cyclical. Every year in December, we get the Game Awards as an increasingly checked out Geoff Keighley awards a medium to big budgeted critical darling, the game of the year, and we can all feel vindicated that a game that gave us such meaning and purpose could get this type of recognition. Video games have emulated Hollywood and the Grammys, giving gamers a sense of legitimacy previously unseen in the 90s and 2000s. This is the 365 cycle, temporal spells created by the invisible hand of the market to keep us locked into perpetual states of hype and anticipation. There's a reason why the Xbox 360 wasn't called the Xbox 365. 360 meant an infinite loop of perfect entertainment. Microsoft even provided the enjoyment for us by giving us achievements. The 360 wasn't meant to be the promise of an infinite potential somewhere in the future. The Xbox 360 was the end of an era, the end of the console era specifically. I'm just waiting for my PlayStation 5 to break down on me, leaving me in an awkwardly desperate situation where I have to decide whether to buy another PS5 or upgrade to a PS5 Pro, which is currently retailing for $750 US. But let's focus on this zero. What is it? It's important to highlight here that zero isn't emptiness or lack. It is definitely something. Anticipation in consumer culture keeps your hype managed and predictable. You always know when an event is going to occur, unless it's like Beyonce's Lemonade or the Sega Saturn's shocking in-stores now announcement at E3 1995, and we all know how that one turned out. But here's the plot twist maybe you didn't see coming. If you use numerology to decode reflexive impotence, you end up with a sum total of 206. 2 plus 6 is 8 if we collapse reflexive impotence to its decimal worth, and 8 is not 0. So the energy behind reflexive impotence isn't necessarily everything sucks and therefore nothing can be done, but we know very well the system is failing and that awareness leaks out. 8 is the trap future that begins the fracture. What about anticipatory culture? 251, which also equals out to 8. So both the trap and the anticipation cycle point to 8, which isn't an overcoming necessarily, but it is an escape vector. People don't just anticipate inside the hype cycle though, they anticipate things they're told not to anticipate, like yearning to play discarded Xbox 360 games that no one remembers. But the problem with this type of singularity anticipation is arguably even more alienating than proper consumer anticipation, because you yourself are doing all the heavy lifting. You're scouring old and forgotten forums or playing an album that 5 other people in the entire world have heard, but you are still using your psychic energy to anticipate. You're just anticipating for yourself and not for the discourse. I pulled this quote from the book Why Liberalism Failed, which gets pretty boring pretty fast, but this quote stuck with me. Quote, "The left is characterized by a preference for change and reform, a commitment to liberty and equality, an orientation towards progress in the future, while the right is the party of order and tradition, hierarchy, and a disposition to valorize the past." Leftists don't valorize the past? This isn't true at all regarding leftists, at least not now. Millennial leftists are obsessed with the 90s and the 2000s, similar to Donald Trump, but where his is economic longing, ours is aesthetic longing. So does that mean we can finally move on from advertising? That is the $1 million question. Or perhaps the $0 question. Maybe it's the values that need to be changed, not accumulation, but waste. Doing things not because they'll show some reward off in the distant future, but because it simply feels better to give something rather than to take something. That could be an act of service or it can be emotional labor, but just be careful because these too can be traps. Fascism is what happens when there is no longer any positive conception of the good life. No time for anything other than imagining the expansion of the nation at the expense of others who make you envious. 2008 was a very strange time to be a millennial. An economic collapse coupled with the arrival of America's first black president signaled a chaotically hopeful time that turned out to ultimately be a whole bunch of neoliberalism, which means a whole bunch of nothing. During his campaign, ads were run for a woman who didn't exist that was called Life of Julia. And yes, the conservative criticism on the ad was the rather overt reliance on welfare, but an even more insidious reality became apparent well after Obama had come and gone. People realized that the only thing in Julia's life was the government, or the state, or the bureaucracy, or the market. Whatever you want to call it. She had no friends, no community, no interest, no church, and no social fabric. Her entire existence was predicated on being not a United States citizen, but a consumer. The last game I played in 2008 was Dead Space. I played it in my parents' living room as I was home for Christmas break. The only other game I played and finished in my parents' living room was Bully. Dead Space is an 8. I felt its 8-ness when I was experiencing it in real time. An 8 is a game you play when it's new, and it does a pretty phenomenal job recycling the same 30-second gameplay loop for a roughly 8 to 10 hour experience. I felt raw after beating Dead Space. I felt like talking about it with other people because it was on every magazine cover at the time, but I didn't feel changed. I will probably never get to fully experience Bullet Witch or Ninja Blade or Steins Gate or Zegapain or Idolmaster because those games are out of print and not backward compatible with any of Microsoft's latest PC emulation machines. Perhaps one day I'll learn Japanese and import them or find a way to hack an Xbox 360, or perhaps I will have learned emulation by then, but I think I would prefer to keep looking forward to them in my head. At least Microsoft had the awareness to keep their 3 best games, all Xbox 360 RPGs, backwards compatible. I plan to complete all of them in a joyful display of hedonistic ecstasy somewhere off in the perhaps not too distant future. So what is a world without the singular obsession of profit accumulation? And by profit accumulation here, I don't just mean working 80 hours a week and not having time for friends or family, though that is often one of the conditions. I'm also talking about the time we spend fantasizing about our future in the present, wishing we felt differently than we currently do. But what is the opposite of accumulation then? I already said it. It's waste. Loafing around, but also caring for others when you could be spending more precious time on insert dopamine machine here. But waste isn't garbage. It's non-productive expenditure, art, ritual, gift giving. And here's the important part. expecting nothing in return. And so I sit here right now in front of a screen telling no one in particular that the Xbox 360 was celebrated in the West for mostly the wrong reasons. Mass Effect 2 is a classic, but are we really going to sit here and pretend it's a better game than Lost Odyssey? Well, for a lot of people it is, because Lost Odyssey is designed for a very specific taste, a taste that in many ways has fallen by the wayside. I can sit here and mourn this, or I can tell the small number of people who care that you should go out of your way to experience it instead of playing Mass Effect 2 for the 10th time. Is it useless to point this out 2 decades after the fact? Yes, and that's precisely why I'm doing it, because no one else is gonna. Thanks for watching.